presenting a lot of concepts that might seem very confusing, and I'm going to try my best to explain them, and what? Oh, let me just do it in presentation mode. Ah, shit, now I need to resize it. Fuck! I'm already making the rings gay. Okay, so again, there might be like some confusing concepts in here. I'm going to do my best to explain everything. I will try. There might be typos, I don't know. But yeah, are we ready? Press 1 if you're ready. Yeah, whatever, I got this. You guys are gonna fucking watch it anyway, and then you're gonna watch me play a little Elden Ring. I don't wanna... Alright, ready? Okay. Okay, we're going. Jesus fucking Christ. Alright, here we are, Grotesque Divinities in From Software's Elden Ring. A presentation by Enemy Charlie. Now, my thesis for the presentation here is essentially that the grotesque nature of the gods and demigods in Elden Ring deconstruct the concept of god, demigod, and encourage us as players to question the authority of language. Alright. Was the lip balm scripted? No. Shut up. Okay. So, before we talk about that, I have to explain what I mean by deconstruct. And so deconstruction was a concept, a philosophical concept introduced by Jacques Derrida, who's a, I think he's French philosopher or something. And I'm going to read these quotes, which actually come out of a theory book written by the dude who was my advisor for my dissertation. He rocks. Love Taylor Driggers. He's awesome. But here we go. The disruption of logocentrism, the metaphysical assumption that signifying structures have an essential origin in the logos or in the infinite understanding of God. Logocentrism, or the belief in pure speech, hold that speech derives from a transcendental signified or original truth, inscribed as the logos of a creator God. Any concept of divinity, transcendence, and the human subject are always mediated through cultural, philosophical, and linguistic presuppositions. So essentially what it means to deconstruct something is to understand it not as fuck, I went over in my brain how I was going to explain this and then I fumbled the bag. Essentially there is a thing that is what is signified, but our signifiers do not, the signifiers we use do not get at the inherent truth of that thing. Essentially the labels, theories, concepts that we come up with do not get at this inherent truth to the universe, because there is no inherent truth to the universe. And that's actually a, I guess, prominent mode of thought within Western philosophy, is that there is a sort of truth to the universe, a truth to things. And so to deconstruct something is to understand that it is not, that we are simply projecting our way of understanding onto that item. It doesn't. Anyway, so that's what I'm talking about. Does that make sense? I'm looking at the chat. Does that fucking make sense? Does that make any sense at all? I'm looking at chat. Yes. Okay, we're golden. I have 2 yeses, 1 kinda. Cool. Fantastic. Wonderful. Anyway, so deconstruction is actually not new to From Software. Oh shit, let me move this slightly. You can see the rest, whatever, actually. And I think that it is actually like present in all throughout Dark Souls. And I think Aldia in Dark Souls 2 sums it up the best. But here are some quotes. Young Hollow, conqueror of fear, what drives you so to overcome this supposed curse? And I'm gonna play some quotes by him and then talk about it.
Once the Lord of Light banished dark and all that stemmed from humanity, and men assumed a fleeting form. These are the roots of our world. Men are props in the stage of life, and no matter how tender, how exquisite, a lie will remain a lie. Young Hollow, knowing this, do you still desire peace? Vinric.
Oh, sorry, I let it go longer on than it want to, and then we have this one.
All men trust fully the illusion of life. But is this so wrong? A construction, a facade, and yet a world full of warmth and resplendence. Young Hollow, are you intent on shattering the yoke, spoiling this wonderful falsehood?
Right, so here, I mean, this is essentially deconstruction. What Aldia is talking about is that the Age of Light that Gwyn began is being unnaturally prolonged. And so to kind of prolong it, Gwyn and others who benefited from the Age of Light or whatever constructed myths, concepts, ideas of light as good, fire good, that is the natural order of the world, that it should be like this, and denied the dark. So, you know, supposed curse in this sense, undeath is not a curse, it was the natural state of the Hollows. But when, you know, and others projected the idea of it being a curse. So again, the idea of deconstructing ideas, concepts, theories, not new to Dark Souls. And in fact, my hold on. Shut up! What? There we go. My favorite thing that Dark Souls does is actually how it plays on the legend of King Arthur. So Artorias, if you all have played the Artorias of the Abyss DLC, Artorias is actually Latin for Arthur. In the Artorias of the Abyss DLC, we essentially take the place of Artorias. We get rid of Manus, we save the town, blah blah blah. We save Ulasil essentially, and we actually have to put down Artorias, who was infected by the Abyss. And we had traveled back in time to do this. And then we go to Elizabeth, who's like a talking mushroom or whatever. She says, I will remember thee, but I will keep thy story to myself. This is the best way, for thou art come from a time far ahead. No one will sing thy praises, but yet thy greatness shall live on. For it shall be my purpose to remember all thou hast done for us. So essentially, the legend of Artorias is a lie. It's a lie that is very politically important in the world of Dark Souls, because he is a non-hollow, killing the abyss, humanity, etc., 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 and he did not fall prey to it. When in reality, it was a hollow that, you know, defeated the abyss, etc. If I'm getting shit wrong, I'm sorry. The games are confusing, leave me alone. This is a parallel to actually how the legends of the Arthurian legends came about. So if you probably know King Arthur, I assume you know King Arthur, King of the Britons. The idea that we have of King Arthur actually is a obviously false one, as it is with history, but that it has been a falsehood happened a lot, like way longer before than you would think. So Arthur, as he was, I believe, was just an Anglo-Saxon guy, probably living in a mud hut, not very splendid necessarily, until Geoffrey of Monmouth, a chronicler, a scholar, in the 12th century wrote the Historia Regum Britanniae. I don't know how to speak Latin, but it is essentially a falsified history of Britain containing the legends of Arthur, Artorias, in Latin. And he revived the Arthurian legends, but with a political purpose in mind. So the way Geoffrey presented the legends of Arthur was he created an image of King Arthur as a conqueror. And he took the form of a Norman conqueror. Now, if you don't know, the Normans were from France. They took over Britain. Damn it! Okay, let me move this. Thank you for telling me. I like that it bothers me. Okay, we're gonna fit to screen. Perfect. Perfect. Pringle. No, this is... Oh, this is it. But it essentially, oh, thank you, the non-man. So it created an image of King Arthur in the style of the Norman conquerors who were in charge of Britain at the time. The Normans really liked this, and if you don't know, at the time, this was when French was what was spoken by people in power. French was the official language, essentially like English was not used. So the idea of Arthur as a Norman-styled conqueror was politically extremely useful. And Andrew D. Pringle, in The Anarchy of King Arthur's Beginnings, the politics that have created the Arthurian tradition, says, in the same way that Joffrey's ancient Britain people had a natural-born right into Britain in Historia, the Normans were beginning to associate themselves with an Anglo-Saxon past and a right to the island as well. So the legends of King Arthur were politically useful in the sense that it gave the Normans this sense of identity, purpose, and a right to the island of Britain, which they had invaded. If I'm getting any history wrong, I'm so sorry. I'm a literature person. And this obviously continues into Elden Ring in a way that I think is very obvious and should be apparent to us. Again, this is not me giving you guys an amazing like revelation. This is me saying this is how they're doing this. So we have this Sergedian Ofnir quote: a Tarnish cannot become a lord, not even you. A man cannot kill a god. And yet we do. And I think that Elden Ring forces us to question what a god is and who decides what a god is. So I have Queen Marika here. And I'm talking about the Newman's Rune item description. So Marika herself is a Newman. She was not born a god, but she became a god. She was made a god. That was a label applied to her. And I pulled some specific quotes that I think really do show how Elden Ring does point out these sort of hypocrisies within the beliefs of the Golden Order. So here we have the Order Healing Incantation. The noble Goldmask lamented what had become of the hunters. How easy it is for learning and learnedness to be reduced to the ravings of fanatics. All the good and great wanted in their foolishness was an absolute evil to contend with. And that's important, because Goldmask here is implying that an absolute evil needed to be artificially created. One did not exist, but it needed to be created. And so the Golden Order created one. And that was those who live in death in this scenario. And then here we have the Crucible Knot Talisman. And pay attention, because this is going to be very important later. A talisman fashioned from a bony knot that embodies the aspects of various creatures, said to have grown on the human body long ago. A vestige of the crucible of primordial life. Born partially of devolution, it was considered a signifier of the divine in ancient times, but is now increasingly disdained as an impurity as civilization has advanced. So, beings associated with the crucible would be the misbegotten, demi-humans, and the omens, whose physical features are an amalgamation of various creatures and were once considered divine, but within the current culture are now labeled cursed, super gross, bad, can't exist. And that's how, you know, evil is constructed. Good and evil is constructed in Elden Ring. We can see that. The concept of divinity is constructed. So you might be wondering, what does this have to do with the grotesque? So first I'm going to define the grotesque, because there's a lot to it. But so Philip Thompson defines the grotesque as the unresolved clash of incompatibles in work and response. Traditionally, when the actual word grotesque was kind of conjured up, it comes from the early Christian Roman period, which describes a style of art combining human, animal, and vegetable elements intricately woven in one painting. So it is essentially physical things that do not belong together. But it is also, our response to the grotesque is incompatible, because the grotesque is often laughable, and it is something that is incompatible with the laughable. It's horrifying. The grotesque is simultaneously humorous and not remotely humorous in the sense that it is terrifying. when we see something grotesque, our response might be disgust, revulsion, pity, fear, but oftentimes we're also kind of laughing because the grotesque is often kind of goofy. This right here is a early, oh no, I guess my thing didn't, but this was a satyr mask from the early Christian Roman period. And this is expanding upon it. Right here we have Salvador Dali. This is a grotesque painting. This is the human body warped to be grotesque. And then this is Junji Ito. This is a girl whose organs are full of different creatures. But one important thing about the grotesque is that it is very physical. The grotesque is always physical. It is always to do with the organic, the body. No matter how strange it is always an aspect of our world. It's always a part of our world. And I think that Mikhail Bakhtin, I will not be pronouncing this, really brings us home. This might not make a lot of sense right now, but to degrade is to bury, to sow, and to kill simultaneously in order to bring forth something more and better. To degrade also means to concern oneself with the lower stratum of the body, the life of the belly and the reproductive organs. It therefore relates to acts of defecation and copulation, conception, pregnancy, and birth. Degradation digs a bodily grave for a new birth. It has not only a destructive negative aspect, but also a regenerating one. To degrade an object does not imply merely hurling it into the void of non-existence, into absolute destruction, but to hurl it down to the reproductive lower stratum, the zone in which conception and a new birth take place. Grotesque realism knows no other lower level. It is the fruitful earth in the womb. It is always conceiving. So the grotesque, it is always very, very physical, but also very human, very organic. And it's, grotesqueries degrade. They bring one down into the realm of the human. Whereas Bakhtin earlier in the passage defines like the head and the shoulders as more divine. Thompson also comments that it is an appropriate expression of the problematical nature of existence. And I think that that is what is important about the grotesque in art, in literature, in media in general. But the grotesque is, it's a reflection of humanity. We are, I think personally, we are grotesque beings. Nothing about us is definable or able to be separated neatly or categorically. Human beings are messy. We're grotesque. What does this have to do with gods, essentially? And why do grotesque demigods and gods, how does that deconstruct divinity? So I'm referencing here the Garden of Earthly Delights, which was a painting done by Hieronymus Bosch in the 1490s, but it is essentially, this is like Eden or whatever, heaven. And then here on the right side, you have hell. You may not be able to see super well right now, but there's like people being mangled here, tortured, bodies are deformed. It's grotesque. Hell is grotesque. And there, I guess there was some debate within Christian theological circles about whether or not depicting the grotesque was appropriate. But James Luther Adams has this to say about that. Bosch could depict the full range of the grotesque precisely because he believed implicitly in God's power to overcome any evil, any horror, any monstrous condition. Bosch was able to represent the grotesque and the demonic. The greater enhanced was the glory of God. And then Mike Duran says, the monstrous conditions Bosch portrayed were simply that, monstrous deformations, anomalous and completely outside the garden of God's intended delights. So in Christian thought, the grotesque, the very organic was not something that could touch the divine. It stood in contrast with the divine. The two could not merge, which is why Bosch's painting here depicting the grotesque acts of hell, the punishments, was appropriate because it stood in contrast to divinity. Get where I'm going with this. So I, in this presentation, I want to walk to Dear Old Rona Forest, if you look. Sorry, I just looked at that. I kind of want to walk through the narrative of Elden Ring. When we start the game, we know ourselves as the Tarnished. We suck. We're gross. There are all these divinities that we need to conquer and attack. And I think that when we get to Godrick, Godrick, his divinity is not, we are not yet challenging the concept of divinity. We have not yet constructed it, because Godrick is portrayed as the dregs of the golden lineage. Everyone talks about him poorly. Kenneth Height says, Lord, don't make me laugh. First he hid himself amongst the women folk to flee the capital, then hid from Radahn in that castle. Then he insulted Melania, lost her in battle, only to lick her boots rather than die like a man. He has no shame. Has he no shame, the big girl's blouse? And then his remembrance says, a feeble man sought power through the grotesque act of grafting. Which, I guess I should talk about grafting first. Grafting is obviously a grotesque act. I mean, it is literally cobbling together the body parts of multiple species and beings and sticking it onto you. But that's not necessarily shocking for a god. Because Godrick is hardly a god. He's a, the dregs of the golden lineage. He's hardly holy. So for him to degrade himself through the grotesque act of grafting is not shocking. Because he already possesses so little divinity himself. And if we go back to Bokton, it makes sense that he's degrading himself because he is already degraded. He's just degrading himself further, essentially sullying himself with the bodies of the non-divine, so tarnished and trolls, specifically people who are graceless. And as we can see here, this is what is left of his divinity. A shriveled up little corpse, not much. And I just wanted to bring this, someone did a, they like undressed the model, and I thought it'd be cool to look at how nasty he looks. There is also a, I want to go back to what Ken said, where he really emasculates Godrick. And now this is really the only time in Elden Ring that we see gender really spoken about, which is super interesting. Because the world of Dark Souls and in From Software games, there's not really a sense of there being like sexism necessarily. So what Kenneth says here is really at odds generally with Elden Ring. He hid himself amongst the women folk to flee the capital. So why would only the women folk be fleeing, essentially? If we know of so many female warriors in Elden Ring, why would just the women folk be fleeing? I don't know. And then he loses to Melania and then licks her boots rather than die like a man. And then he calls him a big girl's blouse. So Kenneth has thoroughly emasculated Godrick. And I find that interesting because in medieval Christian thought, to be a man was to conquer the earthly attachment to the flesh. So even Godrick's grafting is, though it makes him very large and scary looking, is rather a it's a feminine, I'd rather say effeminate act. It is, his act of grafting is emasculating. So it is not just stripping him of the divine, it is stripping him of his masculinity. Under the hegemony of the Golden Order, of course. Only surviving misogynist. The only misogynist in all of FromSoft. But after Godrick, we're not really convinced of, the divine is still the divine. Godrick, as Fingerita Ania assures us, he was but a distant relation, the runt of the litter, his divine blood sorely diluted. So who cares if he's grotesque? But then we get to the round table hold. And I think that is when the, oh shit, when the, oh no! Okay, well you guys can just hear me read it. When the grotesque nature of the divinity here and our concepts of divinity really start to be undone. So the fingers there, we're told, before we can even see them, we're told like we need to seek their wisdom, they're holy, they're wonderful. And then the door opens and they are so nasty. They are so nasty. And I have this Zully the Witch video that I want to show you. Just because I couldn't get a good picture of them in Elden Ring, I went to go take a screen cap. But look at how gross they are. They're repulsive. I mean, they're rotting, they're fleshy, they're organic in a way that is frankly terrifying. There's this part where she gets out the fingers that Ronnie's fingers and compares them to the other fingers. And there we go. These are our divine envoys. They're disgusting. They're terrible. And so I think that is absolutely a turning moment in our the sense of the divine and the grotesque being separated, is that the fingers are fleshy, they're repulsive, they're disgusting, they're hairy, they're beings, they're organic. No. And then I just wanted to, okay, this largely doesn't have a lot to do with my presentation, but I just want to talk about the potential inspiration for the fingers, which actually comes from a actual religious schism, which I think also points to the, I guess, lack of divinity, the humanity, and the organic fleshiness of the fingers. This might be a bit long, and I'm so sorry.
Very few in Moscow had ever interacted with Orthodox Christianity of the
this didn't even start where I wanted it to stop. Okay, well, what the hell? Anyway, essentially, back during like the 17th century Russia, under the Russian Christian Orthodoxy, Russian peasants who couldn't read did the sign of the cross with 2 fingers. While the main church in Constantinople always did it with 3 fingers, like this or whatever. And there was a huge argument when one of the patriarchs of the Russian Christian Orthodoxy Church imposed that upon the Russian peasants, who started to become called the Old Believers, and a lot of people died. And so the schism between the 2 fingers and the 3 fingers might come from here. Which I think also speaks to the, I don't know, I guess the forced divinity of beings like the fingers, because they're essentially really gross little organic creatures. And then we move on to Starscourge Radahn, who I think is genuinely one of the coolest characters in Elden Ring, and has this very, I don't know, there's just a whole big... I'm just going to play the Radahn Festival, but...
Champions, welcome! The stars have aligned. The festival is nigh. General Radahn.
Right. So anyway, what I wanted you guys to listen to there was just the whole... I guess the solemnity of that ceremony, the music in the background, I finally just got him. But essentially the honor with which Radahn is held, and everything we hear about him beforehand is that he's the mightiest hero of the demigods. And then we actually see him.
Before we begin, allow me to paint you the full picture.
Let me skip to where I want you guys to see.
General Reproductive. His wits are long gone. Now he gathers the corpses of former friends and foes alike.
So after all that ceremony, the honor with which the ceremony was held, this is who they're honoring. And obviously, I mean, I think that the divine in this sense is still safe, because Radahn has been infested by another god, but here he is. He's like a rabid animal. He's rotting, he's grotesque, he's eating, his feet have rubbed off. But I think that Radahn is also where the humor of the grotesque comes in. And I have some memes to share. Because despite how cool, and I think you guys would agree, despite how cool Radahn's boss battle is, it's very absurd. there's a lot of like ridiculousness to it, because he's a gigantic rotten man riding a tiny little horse, and then that horse launches him up into the atmosphere and plummets down. So even though it's horrifying that this starving, dying little horse is carrying this big nasty man, it's also really funny. It's really funny. Yeah, and then the horse goes under the sand. But again, the divinity in this sense is still safe. Radahn has just been corrupted by an outer god, which is really bad. But that doesn't mean that there's a separation of the divine and the grotesque can be one and the same. Man does a fucking meteor level Mario Yoshi jump. And before we get to the next part, and this would be leading up to Leyndell, I want to talk about a lore theory that the Tarnished Archaeologist, which is my favorite Elden Ring YouTuber and perhaps favorite YouTuber in general, on just some lore theories, just so that things make sense before I start talking about Morgott, which I think is the well, I'll get to it. Anyway, essentially, the Tarnished Archaeologist thinks that the Erd tree was grafted onto the expansive rootstock of a great tree which had existed in the lands between for a long time, establishing itself as dominant over the lands between. So grafting is the act of essentially taking one tree and then grafting a branch from another tree onto it, so that the branch that is grafted onto it can grow its fruit using the strength of the main tree. His evidence for this is, first of all, we can see, here's the entrance to the Erd tree. I actually took this screen cap yesterday, but we can see a brown tree on the inside and the golden Erd tree on the outside. And then here in earlier buildings, there are tree reliefs all over Elden Ring, but in buildings that are archaeologically older than the more current buildings in Elden Ring, it is actually a conifer tree, not a beech tree, that is expressed on the walls, suggesting that there was perhaps another tree worshipped before the Erd tree. And obviously the newer reliefs, like that we see in Leyndell, are of the beech tree that the Erd tree is. And then I added these beech trees in because I think that these spectral beech trees might point to that's what the original form was, potentially. Anyway, and then there's another theory that he proposes, that reproduction in Elden Ring is not at all organic. It is not biological, that people are produced through the Erd tree. His evidence is, he has a lot more evidence, and I can literally just link you guys the videos because I can't summarize like probably hours and hours of videos into one thing. But I think the most convincing is Melena's lines, where she says, "Does being born of a mother cause one to behave like that? Please seek not the frenzied flame, deny not the lives and new births of this world." So she ties here with the frenzied flame burning the Erd tree to the ground, and the tree in general, to essentially reproduction, new births, and her confusion at Bach's behavior, who is a demi-human, who is impure under the eyes of the Golden Order, comes from a mother. And it's a strange comment, but I think does suggest that people are actually born from the Erd tree. Another example that he gives is the fact that oh god, what are like Melania's little girls, the little red-headed girls running around? That Melania blossomed in Caelid, and then under the blossom, the big tree that she left, those three red-headed girls just showed up. And they don't, Millicent and her sisters, they don't know where they were from, but they just popped up under that tree one day. So I think it's compelling. And we have here, this would be a statue that I think would happen if, so we know the Crucible, yeah? Crucible was the power before the Erd tree, we can assume. I think it was the Great Tree power. And that's where all life was mixed. So people showed up with a lot of different features of different animals, until that Great Tree, that Crucible, was pruned into one succinct lineage. And the Tarnished archaeologist thinks that that's what this statue represents, is that this golden lineage, this essentially human-only lineage, was pruned and grafted. And this is also the lineage of Jesus Christ, which links him to a lot of royalty and important people, which was important to medieval Europeans to establish him as worthy of being the Son of God, because they couldn't really handle the idea of Jesus just being some guy. They wanted to legitimize him. And so the Tarnished archaeologist still thinks, he believes that the power of the Erd Tree comes from reproductive control, and anything that threatens the reproductive control of the Erd Tree is bad. So for instance, Albinorics, they're life forms made by human hands. They live impure lives untouched by the Erd Tree's grace. And so they're impure because they were born outside of the Erd Tree. They are a threat to it. The serpent's amnion, which is a womb that you can find within Volcano Manor, cradled the poor and wanted offspring of a repellent birthing ritual. That would come from Rykard's crappy little manor, and references the whatever weird stuff he was doing to make manservants, essentially. It was reproduction outside of the Erd Tree's control. Then we have the Mimic Tears, which was an attempt by the Eternal City to forge a lord, which I think is likely their attempt to reproduce outside of the Erd Tree's domination. Yes, I do think that their heresy is kinky sex. Well, it's blasphemy, not just heresy, Beard. Also, hi, Sneaky. Thank you for the 6 months. Wow. So then we get to the Omen. I call this What's in a Name because we talk about names. So if the Erd Tree is grafted onto the expansive rootstock of the Great Tree, the Omen are like root suckers, buds grown from the original tree rather than the grafted part, which is a sign that the grafting has failed and the grafted tree will die, even if the root suckers are pruned. So Omen, the birth of Omen, are essentially a root sucker or a resurgence of the original tree popping up. They're also an omen of ill health. They symbolize that the Golden Order is failing. But why are they called omens? Like, what makes them an omen? And to that I turn to James Valentine's article called Naming the Other, Power, Politeness, and the Inflation of Euphemisms. And he says, naming itself is a form of power. Definitional power is socially distributed. Credibility is accorded to the culturally dominant through dominant cultures of the power of the majority, mainstream versus marginal, or through the ideological power of an elite. But essentially, the power to label, to define, is, comes from the powerful. So the Omen, as we can assume from the Curse Not talisman description, which we went over before, are not naturally bad. They are, in fact, really natural. They're normal. They are themselves not grotesque. They are, they're incredibly normal. Anyway, I'll get to that. So Omen babies, as we know, have all their horns excised, causing most to perish. These fetishes are made to memorialize them. Please don't hate me or curse me, please. Now, the Tarnished archaeologist made a connection to intersex people when it came to the omens, which I also made the connection because if you don't know, intersex children historically, intersex meaning someone who is born with genitals that are not really either a penis or a vagina. That is a very dumbed down version of what it means to be intersex, but oftentimes intersex children will be mutilated. However, I wanted to provide these such as the Omen babies are. And I wanted to provide two examples of how meaning is ascribed in a different way over time. So in the reports of magicians and astrologers of Nineveh and Babylon, this is a very, very old text that the Tarnished archaeologist quoted. When a hermaphrodite is born, the son of the palace will rule the land or the king will capture, which essentially means bad things happen when intersex children are born, like the Omen babies. But that is not always so historically. So Augustine of Hippo considered this impulse in creation to multiply his decisivite Dei in regard to the diversification of sexual embodiment. He takes the case of the intersex body, which he calls androgynous and hermaphroditic, and asks whether it is possible that a person that is born neither normate male nor female could be descended of Adam and thus part of the increase and multiplication of humanity. In the end, he allows for the possibility. So this is again an example which I think can kind of demonstrate the point earlier about how the Omen misbegotten demi-humans were once divine. Omen Barn and Royal Omen Barn. What was I talking about? So I couldn't find any examples of intersex people being considered divine, but historically in many cultures, I'm reading chat, of people that we would call trans now actually being considered divine and generally would serve as like priests and oracles in like pagan European cultures, etc., etc. The source is Leslie Feinberg's Transgender Warriors, but I didn't want to include it because I couldn't necessarily find anything about intersex people. But here we have in Babylon being intersex really bad, and then in the this would be early Christian Roman period, it was chill. And perhaps in cultures other than that, it was chillin'. And Bykowski here, MW Bykowski, if you're interested in trans history and medieval trans history specifically, read her articles, MW Bykowski. I can provide links to the interested. But she says, we see the consequence of insufficient or disordered naming and how parents for generations were convinced to surgically alter the genitals of intersex children to make them more male or female, because boy and girl were the only gender names society or the law recognized. So here we're talking about the power of naming, but the power of naming in Elden Ring allows for Omen children to be mutilated and often killed, or they have to live in sewers for the rest of their lives. And so then here we get to Morgott. And I think that this is where the conception of the divine, rather the illusion of the divine, falls apart, is when we meet Morgott, who is an omen, dressed in rags, standing before the Erd Tree. A great rune of the Shardbearer Morgott. This great rune is the anchor ring that houses the base and proves two things: that the Omen King was born of the golden lineage, and that he was indeed the Lord of Leyndell. And again, so this is where I think the divine falls apart. If Morgott, an Omen, is a part of the golden lineage, then is the golden order, is Marika's bloodline pure? No, absolutely not. That means he is natural, he is divine, and Omen are natural and divine still. However, I would not call Morgott's body grotesque, necessarily. Though to us, the viewer, not in the world of Elden Ring, he is undoubtedly grotesque. Within the world of Elden Ring, he is totally natural. I will say, however, I believe that he is grotesque in mind. His mind is warped and sick. He is the last king of Leyndell, and he is owed the throne, but he is standing on it, not wearing shoes, and dressed in rags. Probably the rags that he wore coming out of the sewer. And here in his Remembrance of the Omen King item, it says, though born one of the graceless Omen, Morgott took it upon himself to become the Erd Tree's protector. He loved not in return, for he was never loved, but nevertheless love it he did. And the throne stained by my curse, such shame I cannot bear. So his mind is essentially grotesque and warped by the Golden Order. Okay,